Hello and welcome to my session. The title of my session is Extensive Reading with Using Authentic Materials with Elementary and Secondary EFL Students. I'm Carol Johnson. I thought I would begin with just a brief introduction about the study I'm going to share with you. First is that this was a study conducted with educators in Turkey, educators of students learning English in a foreign language setting, obviously. It was conducted in early 2020, and the goal of the educators was to improve the English language achievement of their students. So that, of course, led us to go back to the literature so that we could get a sense of what was important in terms of trying to implement a study. And we settled on, just as a summary, these 4 studies for support as to the method we were going to use. So we knew from the literature, Yamashita in 2013, that extensive reading has received special attention as an effective and promising way of developing foreign language abilities, and that was important. That was the overriding goal. We knew that there was support for participants' reading comprehension improving when their students read just above and just below the I+1 from Bahmidi and Farvadin 2017. We actually knew also from the research that reading while listening to graded readers, meaning audiobooks, seemed to be more efficacious than silent and extensive reading in improving the students' receptive skills by Milliner in 2019. And then finally, we knew from Paul Nation's work, of course, that extensive reading, has some characteristics that involve independent reading, silent reading, lots of reading, comprehension, etc. So we felt confident that the literature would support what we were going to examine in this study. So with that, we had lots of conversations around how we could best design the study given the following considerations. The first is that we were just looking at 8 weeks. So the educators in these schools wanted to do 8 weeks of trial and study to see if using these authentic books would work for their students at all. We had different ELP levels, English language proficiency levels, CEFR levels, and mostly on the early end, though, the early learners, beginners, but we definitely had absolute beginners in the study. We had multiple grade levels. We had then still the discussion about graded readers versus authentic books. These were really important conversations prior to the beginning of the study, obviously, and the design. In addition to just which books would be best, we had other issues, including, how were we going to get enough books? How were we going to have enough topics? Could we address enough reading levels? Certainly the issue of accessibility was one. So those were all factors in determining how we were going to move forward with the study. And among this, again, I go back to that short timeline, because this is not something that we were looking for an entire school year to accomplish. It was 8 weeks. And then last of all, we wanted to know whether or not we could see gains, reading gains for the students in this study, in just 8 weeks of time. So that conversation led to just some really straightforward research questions that we wanted to answer. And the first was, could authentic books be used in an extensive reading program for students learning English in a foreign language setting, including those at the very beginning levels, absolute level of language development? Would these students at the beginning levels be able to demonstrate gains? Would we actually see reading gains from the use of these authentic books if these were the books that we were going to use, and they are the books we used, authentic? Then, of course, we wanted to know if the gains would be statistically significant. That's obviously something we're looking for. And finally, they can be significant but not meaningful. Above all, what we were looking for, were they meaningful? So those are the questions we hope to answer in this study. Moving to the methodology, this is a summary of the participants of the study. So this took place in 80 schools, public schools in Turkey, as I said, in early 2020. The students were in grades 2 through 7. Now, originally, there were 4,200 students in the study, but when it came to actually matching students to grade level, because that was really important, we found that it was now, really, we had that for 2,900 students only, and that was fine. But at the end of the day, the amount of students that actually completed the entire study was 902 students. So this means they completed the pre and post test and the treatment, which was authentic books. As for materials, I actually pulled this image from the internet. So this is not an actual image from the study. But it was authentic books and they were in the digital format. And I say that because these are books that are available in hard copy also, but in this instance for accessibility, digital formatting was really important. And they could be used not only on a device like this, a tablet, but a computer or even a phone. And the assessment that we used to determine whether or not there were gains was a reading assessment that's used in 180 countries, developed by Metametrics. It is for grades K through 12. It is administered on the computer. It is an adaptive test of multiple choice reading questions, and the scores are represented in Lexiles. So I want to give you a sense of what the Lexile scores look like typically, so you can get an overview first and context for that. And let you know that these are the ranges that are typically reported for native English speakers in the United States. So these are not levels for students learning English in a foreign language. This is what's seen for native speakers in the US. And I wanted to give you context for this so you get a sense of grade level reading that we're talking about for native speakers. So you can see that I've listed on the screen, and this is from the Metametrics website, that they have these measures for grades 1 through 12. And the typical ranges by grade level are shown on the Lexile measure on the right column. So for grade 1, students typically read at a beginning reading level from 120 to an actual Lexile level of 295. And for Lexile, beginning reader is actually below 0 in terms of where it sits on the scale. And you can see then it moves up through the grade levels, but there's a range for every grade level, and it's a pretty wide range. And it moves all the way from the beginning reader level for grade 1 to 1440 Lexile for grades 11 through 12. So I wanted to share that so you had context for this study and what these measures meant in terms of compared to native speakers. All right, so let's move to the procedures. So they were very simple, as you can imagine. The students took the reading pretest. In this study, all of the students were enrolled at grade 1. The reason for that is that we wanted to make sure that, let's say, students in grade 7 were not given reading questions that were appropriate to a native English speaker in grade 7. We needed to have a means of providing this assessment that made sense and was reasonable for students learning English in a foreign language setting. And so in order to do that, we enrolled all the students at grade 1, which is the lowest level in the assessment for enrollment. And since it's adaptive, the assessment itself took care of the actual Lexile level that the student reached. Following that, the teacher used the Lexile scores to guide the students' book choices. So in the literature that I cited, remember we talked about I+1, and so our a version of I+1 became offering a reading range for students that was 100 Lexiles below to 100 Lexile to 50 Lexiles above their pretest score. In addition, it was really important to consider the students' interests because, of course, one of the goals of extensive reading is we want students to read a lot, and students will tend to do that when it's something that's interesting to them. As for the students, then, it was their job to listen to and read the books. They were given instructions to highlight unknown words that they encountered in the books, and then use those words to build their own personal dictionary with one of the tools in that's available from this digital book series. And then after 8 weeks, students took the reading test again. So that's the simple, straightforward procedure for the assessment. So I want to share with you the outcome of the pre-tests first. These were the Lexile scores by grade for the pre-test for the students in the study. And you can see on this slide, on the bottom left to right, I have the grade levels, grade 2, 3, 4, etc., up to grade 7. And then I also have next to them A1 for grades 1 through 6, and then A2. Now, the reason that's there is simply because in these schools, their expectation was that from grades 2 through 6, students would still remain at a CEFR A1 level. And their goal was that by grade 7, they would attain a CEFR A2. So while we did not test them to determine that, that was the expectation of the schools themselves. So left to right, looking at the Lexile scores by grade, you can see that we were unable to attain a Lexile score for second graders, students in the second grade. You know, those were the very absolute beginners. So we were unable to achieve that for them in the pretest. But now look at grades 3 and grades 4. Notice the Lexile for grade 3 and grade 4 are almost identical, which is interesting because they are still true very beginning learners. Moving up grades 5, 6, and 7, you can see that each grade scored higher than the previous grade. And with the grade 7 scoring 181 for its averaged Lexile score. What I want to give you a sense of is the context again. So what are those ranges? What do they mean compared to the scale scores that I showed you in the previous slide where there's the context for the United States? And these scores are scores that are typical of native English speakers in the United States in grades 1 through 2. So you can get a sense of that. Wanted you to have perspective on what that meant. So now I want to turn to what we did in terms of the I plus or minus 1 and show you what that range looked like for book selection, where again, we ranged from below 100 Lexiles below the scaled score to 50 above. And so for grades 2 through 4, I've highlighted with a green box. You can see that grades 2 through 4 still read in the beginning reader category on the low end of that range, all the way up to 116 Lexile on the high end for grade 4. You can see the range for them. And so I wanted to give you a sense of what that would look like. And now I really want to show you what the text looks like in sample books. Now, again, the books I'm going to share with you are books that are not unique to the digital program that was used in this study. And in fact, they are, excuse me, didn't mean to do that. And in fact, they are available in hard copy, etc. These are all books that are labeled in this digital series as being books appropriate to beginning readers. And remember, these are authentic books. So when they say beginning readers, they are talking beginning readers, native speakers. And in this case, these were the kinds of books that were appropriate to the students in grades 2 through 4 in the study who were very early learners of English. You want to move that out of the way. So I want to show you the inside of the books. And again, these books are not unique to this series. These are just sample pages, so you'll get a sense of the vocabulary and text and grammatical structure in these books. But the first thing I want to remind myself and you is that I have these two little smiley face icons, one for listening and one for reading on the screen. And that's literally because students listened to and read these books. So in this book, the first sample page I'm showing you, the student has highlighted the word loud as a word that is new to him. He doesn't know that word. He has then put that word, typed that word using a tool that comes with this series in a My Dictionary form, creating his own personal dictionary. And in parentheses behind, the student has actually entered the Turkish translation for this word, therefore creating his own bilingual dictionary. I do want to share with you that I mocked these up myself for the purpose of this presentation. And therefore the translations are from Google Translate. So if there are mistakes, they are mine. They are because I do not speak Turkish and I do not have enough knowledge of Turkish to always make a good choice from the dictionary options. And I know those of us that teach language know what that means. So I needed to share that before moving on. The mistakes are mine, so please know that. The next book I want to show you, the inside page, is also of those four that I showed you previously, the book covers. And you can see, again, these are short, simple sentences. And in this case, these are really fairly high frequency words. So they are not beyond the level of students at the initial stages. That doesn't mean that they are actually perfect for students who have no English in place. Let's be candid about that. But I wanted to share that with you. And in this case, I wanted to share also that the dictionary that the student is creating stays with that student in this series. And that's a really important thing. Here's another page from the sample textbook book covers I showed you. Again, simple text, made for native speakers, but not beyond the ability of early learners. And one more. So all of these are from these beginning reader books. There are many, many more than I'm showing you. I just wanted to give you an example of what is the text like that these students are being exposed to. And in this case, I wanted to show you beginning readers because really from grades 2 through 4, they all could fall in that category in terms of these were books that would be appropriate to them based on their Lexile pretest scores. All right, I want to move on and move up the grade levels to grades 3 through 5. And I've again highlighted the reading range created for those students based on their Lexile pretest scores. And you can see now that grade 5 is the first one for which they're probably not going to be reading beginning readers, although they can. They absolutely can. You know, this is an average, a mean average, and therefore there may be students who still would be appropriate to that. The teacher could tell from the individual Lexile score what was appropriate to the individual student. So these are books that would be typical for grades 3 through 5 in this study. And they are plus or minus 100 Lexiles as a general rule. So you can see I have books ranging from a 70 Lexile to 120, just so you get a sense of what these books look like. And again, these would be books that would be typically appropriate to the students in the study in grades 3 through 5. Again, all of them listen to and read, and I want to share with you some inside pages so you can see the text. This is the first book I'm showing you is on the lower end. The first thing you can see is that there's really a very low frequency word here, the word branch. And in this case, the student has highlighted it. It's a word that's certainly not likely to appear in an early language text. And therefore, the ability to learn this word is really nice from an authentic text like this, where it's still a very simple grammatical structure. And it is also supported by pictures. So I wanted to share that first one with you for that reason. The next one I want to share with you is also at that same Lexile range. Here you see a longer text on the screen, but you notice as contrasted with the previous text I showed you, all the words in this text tend to be high frequency words. And so that's something I need to discuss right at this point in my presentation. And that is the way books are leveled in Lexile is typically by sentence length, meaning how many words in a sentence, and the frequency of the words using corpus linguistics. So in fact, high frequency words tend to allow for a longer text at the same Lexile level than low frequency words in a shorter text, which you think about the one previously, the one with the word branch was in it. You can see the contrast here. And so that gives you the ability to give variation to students in their reading, which is really important too. I've decided to show this screenshot because this is kind of one of those things that supports, gives a sense of how well using these authentic books can actually support what's being taught directly in the classroom. So in the case of grammatical structures that are taught directly in the classroom from a textbook, which is very typical, of course, I brought this page up because the structure of indirect and direct objects is one that's interesting in English, and that there's some variation in how it can be said. So this sentence, chickens give us eggs, can also be said, chickens give eggs to us. And that ability to internalize that from direct instruction and then apply it is very, very difficult when learning another language. Those of us that are second language learners and second language teachers know that from both ends, from both experiences. And so this kind of text, an authentic text, gives the opportunity for students to hear that and read it as a support, in fact, for what's being taught directly in the classroom. And that's the reason I chose this book page as an example. This one is a fiction book, excuse me, and it's the first I've shown you. And the reason I've shown it is because it was a book that a lot of the students in this study liked. You can see I have highlighted the words that tend to be low frequency. You can see the trade-off between word frequency and sentence length in this. It becomes very obvious. And again, the students that loved this book, even though they learned more words, meaning they came in knowing less of the words in the book, were so interested in it that they in fact did well with books like this because it was so interesting to them that they tend to stay with it until they really internalize the language of the books. And that was interesting to see and rewarding also. All right, I'm going to move up grades 4 through 6, and we're moving to higher levels again. For me, the point of this in my presentation is to share with you what the texts look like, because until participating in this study, I'm not sure I would have fully understood that how well authentic text could be used with early language learners until I actually opened up and looked at the text in helping prepare. So in this, I'm looking at grades 4 through 6. Again, they listen and read. I've pulled higher level texts because they're appropriate to these students, and these range from 150 to 190 Lexile. Now you can see there's a little more text on the screen. That's one of the things you see here. And while most of the words are high frequency words, certainly the word female and parent may be low frequency words depending on the student. And the beauty of this, again, is this is dependent on the student. So the student would highlight the words. I want to remind you that this was not an assignment where the student was told which words to highlight, but in fact to highlight words that were new to that student. And it can even be words that the student wanted to just reinforce him or herself. This one is certainly a nonfiction book. It's obvious when you look at it. The thing I like about this book, though, is it gives you an example of how now students at this level are beginning to be able to transition to other subject area content, which is very unlikely to be given as an opportunity through language textbooks. It's just not possible to do that. But when controlling for the language of an authentic book, students can then move to more nonfiction books like this. And they did so very successfully in this study. And the reason they did it was certainly they were controlled for the level of the book, but students were really encouraged to choose books that were interesting to them. And that is really what kept students engaged, I think, above all, not just the simplicity of the texts that they read, but the fact that they were able to choose from hundreds of books that were of interest to them. And that's what kept them engaged, I believe. I chose this book because the previous book had the word trunk in it. And I wanted to make the point that what we saw over and over with students was as they built their own dictionaries, read books, highlighted words, and built their own dictionaries, they would re-encounter words that they had read in previous books. And that was how we were aware through observation of them building, in fact, their lexicons, their vocabulary. And this one, the student did not highlight the word trunk. The student had already encountered the word trunk and had learned it from previous books. But blob is such a low frequency word. That made it interesting to me, this book, because really on this page, what the student is being asked to do is read the text on the left and infer what is the student doing having read the text. And that really is a whole new level of reading for the students. And students loved this. This one, again, obviously content area vocabulary, but I just wanted to share because these were books that our science students loved. I mean, they just absolutely loved. Students who loved geography also tended to read a lot of these books. All right, I want to move finally to grades 5 through 7 so you get a sense of what those books texts would look like. I have books that are 200 through 280 Lexile. Again, these were really appropriate to students in grades 5 through 7 at the higher levels. I've wanted to show you inside what they looked like. And I chose this one because this one actually was a book that students loved. And even though this vocabulary is so low frequency, the grammatical structures are still manageable for the students. And the students were so into this book. It was really, really fun to watch. I just have to say it that way. So I wanted to share that with you. This book, students who loved soccer loved this book. You know, short text, but notice the vocabulary the students getting out of it. Back to content area vocabulary, students who loved science, again, love these kinds of books. And the thing about these books that made them so interesting was this was knowledge students already had in there and could express in Turkish, their native language. But with this, they were now able to, they began to learn and express this knowledge in English also. And it made it meaningful, not just for those of us that saw this happening, but their students themselves. And finally, I want to show you this book because we had a lot of students who were interested in physics, in sciences, things like that. And this book, although a very low level book, it's the highest of the levels I'm showing you. You can see the sentence structure is incredibly simple, but notice the kind of words the students is encountering here. And so this also was a very, very well-liked book from students in the higher grade levels. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. And you can see by my example on the screen that this is where the student can actually see his or her vocabulary building because they were given this task where they, you know, we encourage them to do that. And again, it was listening and reading. So having looked at books, I want to just now go back to the study itself and the sequencing in the study and look at the post-test scores. So after 8 weeks with the books, the students took the test again, the reading test again, and these are their post-test scores. So we were able to get a post-test score on grade 2, and now you can see the growth. Each grade gets higher growth than the previous grade. You can see that happening. You can see a separation of between grades 3 and 4 here, which is an interesting thing. And you can see how high grade 7 went. Now, so again, this is really amazing because in the pretest, we were unable to get a score on grade 2. And on the pretest, grade 7 scored a Lexile of 181. So you can see it's very, it is very clear when you see the comparison that in fact there was growth. So I want to show you the gains that were made by Lexile, by grade level in Lexiles. So grade 2 grew 17 Lexiles, grade 3, 18. Notice those are still really the very, very early beginners, you know, call them absolute. Grade 4 gained 36 Lexiles, grade 5, 49, grade 6, 56, grade 7, 59. So you can see this is really growth. They definitely showed growth. But I want to go back to our questions of were really, would the growth be significant and would it be meaningful? So I want to just keep that in mind as we're looking at this. And I want to show it separately first before giving context to it. What I want to show here now is on the screen so you can see visually the comparison between the pre and the post scores because there was growth. Okay, so this shows the comparison pre and post. And that's a really important. So the pre-scores are in green, except for grade 2 where we don't have a pre-score. The post scores are in blue, and you can see them side by side. So it's obvious there is definite growth. But I want to provide context because the growth was significant. I'm going to tell you that. But we were still thinking through, what does it mean? Is it meaningful? You know, can we show that? And once we laid it out visually, it actually became clearer. So if you look at the post-test score for grade 3 and compare it to the pre-test score for grade 4, what you see is there's a year's worth of reading growth in 8 weeks. A year. Now compare the post-test score for grade 4 to the pre-test score for grade 5, and you see the same thing. There's a year's worth of reading growth in 8 weeks. Post-test score for grade 5 compared to the pre-test score for grade 6, 1 year's reading growth in 8 weeks. one more. Post-test score for grade 6 compared to the pre-test score for grade 7, an entire year's reading growth. That's meaningful. So we now were fully aware that this wasn't simply statistically significant, but it was in fact meaningful. And not only did we recognize it, but the participants recognized it. So here are the results of our study, just to kind of give a summary. Our first question asked, could authentic books be used in an extensive reading program for EFL students, including those at the very beginning level of language development? And of course, the answer was yes. I've shown you in just in those previous slides that yes, we could use them with them. Then we wanted to know, would these students demonstrate at the beginning levels of proficiency, demonstrate reading gains? And in fact, they did, yes. So the next question became relevant to the statistical significance. We had statistical significance for grades 2 and 4 through 7. The results for grade 3 were not statistically significant. The effect for grade 2 was small, but the effect for grades 4 through 7 was medium. And we think that that's meaningful because, again, we're talking 8 weeks, 8 weeks. And that's 1 year's reading growth in 8 weeks. So definitely we see that as meaningful. The other thing I wanted to share is, of course, there's always the look for cause and effect in any kind of research. And so, you know, because this was a digital book, it was easy to track number of books read, you know, time spent reading, all those kinds of things. And those were really important. But this cause and effect relationship that is so clear in the relationship became clear for us in this study. And that is, the more words the students read, the higher they grew in their Lexile. No surprise, absolutely no surprise. That's what the research says. And that's what we found also. So just to give you a little recap before, you know, winding this up, the study took 8 weeks. That's from pre-test to post-test, you know, 8 weeks reading in between pre-test, post-test. The average time spent reading by the students was 42 minutes per week. That's per week. So realize how little reading they did. And then we would argue how effective that was. The average books read was 53. These are not long books. You know, we didn't give tomes to students. We made sure that we guided books based on their Lexile test scores. And that led us to very low level books, even though still authentic books. The average words read was 25,000. That's a lot of words. The average reading, the reading growth ranged from 17 Lexiles, for second grade to 59 Lexile for 7th grade. And it was significant for grades 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we believe it was very meaningful because of that 1 year's reading growth in 8 weeks. So in conclusion, you know, the basic conclusions we came to were that from the study were that, yes, it was significant for most of the grades. It was not significant for grade 3, but it was for grades 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It was meaningful given the growth, the amount of growth we saw. And we believe that it's important to do more studies like this to refine how the implementations go, et cetera. And therefore, certainly we have more studies planned. So I thank you for this time today. I look forward to spending time with you in the question and answer session live. Thank you so much.